I'm doing I don't know what you want to call it, a talk. That's what we called it on staff with Campus Crusade at another church on May 22nd. And it's going to be a lot of this Roman stuff. It's going to be called the Hellenistic Advance. It's an encapsulation of, well, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about in this study. But I was thinking about this slide, transformative events in the history of redemption. Whoops. Can't move that up. Transformative events in the history of redemption that I just put together on the spur of the moment a couple of months ago. And I was thinking about those three that are highlighted and how, you know, we tend to draw out the spiritual significance of the things that happen. Like we spiritualize, how do I say this without it sounding negative, and theologize, for example, the cross. And by doing that, a lot of times we leave behind the actual event. But I was looking at this list here, and it occurs to me that every single one of these events happened in history. They are an event on the ground. They are a part of the unfolding human drama, which God either initiated or used to advance his purposes. And I was thinking about, you know, you could say the covenant with Abraham is entirely spiritual, I suppose, because it's simply God speaking to Abraham. But his move down from Haran to Canaan wasn't. That was a historical event. That happened. And so that's what you read when you read the Old Testament and all the Gospels and Acts. You're reading a history of God's activities, or the ones that he was willing to consent to, or the ones that he was willing to record for us to remember. But it's the history of redemption is the history of what God has done, but it happens on a human timeline. And so I was thinking about these three here. The exile of Judah, you see in the Bible, of course, with the southern exile in 587 BC, you know, Second Kings, the end of Second Kings, Second Chronicles, one of the most devastating historical periods in the history of Israel. It was transformative, though, even up to and including the story that we read in Acts. The other two, you need read nothing about in the Bible, because these events happened after the close of what we think of as the Old Testament period, and then before the opening of the New Testament period with the birth of, let's say, John the Baptist. These events happened between those two periods, so that when the New Testament period opens up, all three of these events and their after effects have, converged to produce the world that we've been looking at on these maps. And so you have the exile throws these Jews far flung to the east. And then I don't really know how it happens. The pastor might know more about that. He's got the PhD in history. But then, you know, with the rise of Greece in the late 300s, you know, when they replaced the Persians and they basically take over the Persian Empire plus some, you know, maybe these Jews are moving around, but they're getting Hellenized. They're learning Greek. They're called, the culture is becoming Greek. The synagogues are becoming Greek because we're in the intertestamental period when the synagogues arose. Synagogues, by definition, are a Hellenistic thing because you don't have a temple. So in the New Testament, that's what you see. You see synagogues all over the place, which is where Paul went. And then the Romans come along and, you know, scour up basically the remnants of the Greek Empire. And we now have that Pax Romana, that Roman peace that allows Paul to do this freely and safely, and take not take this Roman road. Did I put that in there? I thought I put that in there, the Roman road network. Yeah, there it is. The Roman road network. I mean, it doesn't look like much to you and me, but this is how the advance of the gospel happened on these roads and in these synagogues and then out into the marketplace. And that's how it went. But it all as a result of the convergence of the dispersion of the Jews among the Gentiles then the beginning of Hellenization, the advance of Hellenization throughout the Mediterranean basin, and then the advance of Rome and the Pax Romana and Roman engineering and Roman law and order that produce a world where this could even happen, let alone that it could happen on foot. It's an amazing story to me. So you end up then with a person that was not possible during the Old Testament period. You end up with a person who is a Hellenistic, meaning Greek-speaking, Jewish, Pharisaical, Roman Christian that sits at the heart of the story of Acts and the advance of the gospel and the history of redemption. All of that went into making this person here. And when you step back on it again, you can just, I keep using the phrase, it's a masterpiece of redemptive artistry. As all of these things happen and coalesce both on the ground in the human world and spiritually to produce this unique individual that could not have existed really 100 years before, 200, let's say 200 years before. So anyway, I was just thinking about that as I was working on the other thing. It's 9:32, so let's move. Anybody want to say anything about that? You're welcome. It's like a mini sermon. That's the basis of a sermon right there. Okay, we're on the third journey. And as I've said before, you can call it a journey. The first two really were journeys. The first one was a journey around southern Galatia, Cyprus and southern Galatia right here. Then the second one, Paul pushed out across Asia without any ministry there into Macedonia and Achaia. And he came back to Syria, to Antioch up here. Promptly went back to Ephesus, where he will spend basically the entirety of what we call the third journey. You know, we like these patterns, right? Lists and stuff. So we, you know, the first, it doesn't sound right to have a first and second missionary journey and then a trip to Ephesus. So you have a first, second, and third missionary journey. Some people even talk about the trip to Rome being a fourth missionary journey, but maybe it is in God's eyes. It certainly was a ministry. It's already on the, it's been penciled in, humanly speaking, for quite a while. God's had it, of course, decreed. But he spends 3 years in Ephesus, and the rest of this arrow, you know, he's gonna go, when he leaves Ephesus, he's gonna travel through Macedonia down to Achaia, and then he's gonna go back again. And he's gonna do these coasting vessels to get all the way back to Jerusalem, which we're not at yet. But he's going to stop in it. He's going to want to talk to the Ephesian elders before he heads back. So it's all about Ephesus on the third journey. What was I going to say about these? Yeah. So we are so far on the third journey. I'll keep calling it that since he is right here down here. Paul's third missionary journey. I'm not trying to be difficult or quibble. You know, it works for me. But you know, these patterns that we like to work in, they can sometimes mask a reality, and that's, I think, what this one does. When you remember that this is really Paul's trip to Ephesus. That's how important and central Ephesus is. Remember, Jerusalem. So you have Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. And you have Jerusalem, Antioch, Ephesus. If you think in city, Rome, if you think in terms of cities. Those track roughly parallel to each other. In each of the, or in many of these, so now we're on the way back, and Paul and Luke has had stories to tell on the stories. The trip back is practically longer than the entire first missionary journey as far as narrative goes. He's very interested in this trip back. So he tells a story in Troas. Do you remember what the story is? In Troas? That's the story of Eutychus, who Paul bored to death and back, essentially. Then he's going to tell the story in Miletus of the farewell statement by Paul to the church, to the elders in Ephesus. Then he's going to come to Tyre, which we've already gotten to, and there's this touching moment where he spends 7 days with the disciples in Tyre, and they have this moment on the beach when they pray together, and then he gets on the ship And then we're going to have now the story on the way, still not at Jerusalem, but on the way, he's going to stop at Caesarea, and we're going to hear another story, which I think we already started. So I have us in, I have us in 8, I'm going to say. So they're going to get to they're going to get to Caesarea now. We'll look at the map in a minute. When we had, huh?
It was a greeting, so I listed something.
Again, this pale yellow is places. This is a Luke thing, man. He loves to name places and port cities, right? Look at the, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 port cities. He names on the way back. So do with that as you will. I'm talking about it because it's there, as I said many times. So it's there, so I'm talking about it. But I do notice that Luke has stories to tell about what happened in these port cities, in these port stops he made at the end of the last trip. The next day we left and came to 8 through 8. On the next day we left and came to Caesarea, and entering the house of Philip, he's moving quick again, the evangelist, who was one of the 7. So people are expected to know what this means. We stayed with him. He's never called the evangelist. Who is Philip, first of all? He's one of, what is he referring to?
The evangelist.
What is he referring to here? Acts chapter 6. What happens in Acts chapter 6?
The 7 guys, maybe the first.
Yeah, they pick, they got some troubles in the church in Jerusalem because there's Hellenistic Jews now in Jerusalem, in the church in Jerusalem. See, not only do Gentiles and Jews not get along, but Hellenistic Jews and Hebraic or Palestinian Jews don't get along either. There's this, just this caste system, and the Palestinian Jews, I think they just thought of themselves as first among equals, maybe. I mean, it's not that they didn't care about the Hellenistic Jews, but you're in Jerusalem now, and this is our turf. And so they were getting favored. The locals favored their own. And so the leaders of the church in Jerusalem, meaning Peter, had them designate 7 leaders, 7 elders, or whatever you want to call them, to administer the church so they could continue preaching the gospel. And so they picked, and I think this is the importance of this, they picked 7 Hellenistic Jewish Christians. And so even within Jerusalem, you can see a turn to the Hellenistic world, even in the church in Jerusalem. Almost from the very beginning, even the church in Jerusalem was heavily Hellenistic. And we're going to read about another one here in just a second, named Nason. But Philip was the second one on the list. You remember the first one on the list? Stephen was number 1, Philip was number 2. Then we get a story about both of those, one each. He does that a lot. The story about Stephen was, of course, his powerful refutation of the Jews in the synagogue of the freedmen, the Hellenistic synagogue in Jerusalem, or one of them. And then Philip was the story of the Ethiopian that he converted, who was on his way back to Ethiopia. And so at that point, he's never called the evangelist. So Luke is writing after the fact. Here's my speculation. Philip has the reputation of being the evangelist from the 7. So the 7 were known to his audience, and that Philip was the evangelist was known to his audience. And Luke has now in chapter 6 and 7 and 8 explained how that came to be. But they already knew that. The audience already knew that when they read this, because he doesn't bother explaining these terms. He just calls him one of the 7, expecting that they're going to know. I should look at my notes again. So Philip, here's the irony. Think about all the ironies going on right now. Paul is headed back to a place that he hasn't been in recorded time in a couple of decades, or not that long, I'm sorry. When was the last time he was in? Sometime in the 40s, he was in Jerusalem. So it's been, I don't know, long time since he's been in Jerusalem. And remembering that he was one of the instigators of the persecution that got Stephen killed, which we'll talk about. And that caused these people to have to scatter, among whom was Philip, who ended up in Samaria because of Paul and others like Paul. So don't miss the moment. When Paul comes back to Jerusalem on his last trip, where does he stay? He stays with Philip that he helped persecute. There's no record that they ever met, but it's just, you can't miss the moment. It's another element in here, in the history of redemption that you just marvel at, that it works. So you never would have anticipated this in Acts chapters 6 and 7 and 8 until the conversion of Paul. But Philip's dropped out of sight. We've heard nothing about him. We last heard from him when he moved to Caesarea after he converted the Ethiopian. He went to Caesarea, and then, so that was chapter 8. So then 13 chapters later or so, where do we find him? There he is in Caesarea waiting for Paul, so to speak. Like that whole time he's been waiting for Paul. Okay. Onward, 9 through 17. Now this man, Philip, had 4 virgin daughters who were prophetesses. You could also put in the word unmarried, I think. As we were staying there for some days, so remember what's looming on the horizon, they're between Pentecost and Passover, trying to get to Jerusalem before Pentecost. So they have some time to spare, partly also because the ships are finished. So I guess they're not waiting for ships anymore. Let's see. So he had these 4 daughters who were prophetesses. We know nothing more about them. We never get their names. And as they were staying there for some days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. Do you remember the name Agabus? Who is Agabus? What has he done?
Outside the family.
He did. You get extra credit if you know the chapter. You get extra credit if you know whose reign. You get extra credit. You get lots of extra credit. You get 1 extra credit if you know what he prophesied.
Prophesied that he could tie his hands and his feet.
No, the first time,
Oh,
which he already got. He prophesied the famine. You get
You
a,
get some credit.
you get extra credit if you know in whose reign that happened, because that emperor is named.
George.
Now that's the king.
That's close. Well, the king reigned,
So
right?
there are 3.
The king reigned.
Yeah,
so
the
I could
emperor's
extra
king. You could,
credit.
maybe they called him George. But there are 3 named emperors in in Luke and Acts. Augustus, who was the first emperor, Tiberius
It was Tiberius.
is great
I remember.
grandnephew or
Tiberius.
something, and then Claudius, who was also of the lineage of Julius Caesar. So those are the 3. This one is Claudius, Acts chapter 11. If you got Acts chapter 11, that would be super duper extra credit. And what do you get for all these extra credits?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
You're unfailing gratitude.
My unfailing mild indifference. I guess would be one way of putting it. I am only mildly indifferent to you, as opposed to ferociously indifferent. If you got all this, I would have been mildly indifferent.
It was Tiberius, wasn't it?
What?
That,
The famine?
during his reign.
Claudius, 46 AD. You get super duper extra fantastical credit if you know the beginning and ending of Claudius's reign. Ooh, I got an excuse. Guess where I get to go? There he is. 41 did you get 41 to 54? Who just said that? Oh, you did. Oh, he's looking at the map. Yeah, 41 to 54. Right here. Most of Paul's ministry happened during the reign of Claudius and Nero, which is going to be interesting because Paul is going to appeal to Caesar to get protection from the Jews who want to kill him. And the Caesar that Paul is going to appeal to is Nero, who is the one who is going to instigate the ferocious hostility against the Jews in Rome because of the fire that's going to occur in 64, which is still 8 years away at this point. And then it's off the deep. But at any rate, it's another one of those great ironies of the history of redemption.
Wow.
That was pretty good indifference. Right there. I appreciate that. Indifference. Okay, enough. So that's Agabus. So here he comes again. He doesn't get an introduction this time. He just simply comes down. And coming to us, he took Paul's belt, bound his own feet and hands, said, "This is what the Holy Spirit says. In this way, the Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt." There's your roundabout expression for the name Paul, or you. Could have just said, "We'll bind you." But prophets don't talk like that. "Will bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles." When we heard this, we, as well as the local residents, began begging him not to go up to Jerusalem, 64 miles away. Paul answered, "What are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready not only to be bound, but even to die at Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." Since he would not be persuaded, we fell silent, remarking, "The will of the Lord be done." There's so much in here that you could simply look past, but you just scratch the surface, and this is an amazing exchange. First of all, in true prophetic fashion, what's this right here? In true prophetic fashion comes Agabus. This is Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel. You get a little bit of extra credit if you know who the first king of the southern kingdom of Judah was.
Rambo.
Okay, y'all want that credit. And so a prophet named Ahijah comes up to him, and this is how it works. Ahijah had clothed himself with a new cloak, and both of them were alone in the field. Ahijah took hold of the new cloak, which was on him, tore it into 12 pieces, said to Jeroboam, "Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord." There's that great statement. In Acts, it's "thus says the Holy Spirit," replacing "thus says the Lord. The God of Israel, behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hands of Solomon and give you 10 tribes. So this demonstrative prophecy is very common in the Old Testament. And in case you go, "Man, I wish God would do that with me." I want to do that. I want to be one of these great prophets that God wanted me to demonstrate his plan through. Yeah, about that. In the year that the commander, so this is the fall of the northern kingdom of Judah, I'm sorry, of Israel in 722 BC at the hands of the Assyrians, when Sargon, king of Assyria, sent him, this guy. He fought against Ashdod and captured it. That's one of the Philistine cities. And at that time, the Lord spoke through Isaiah, the son of Amos, saying, "Loosen the sackcloth from your hips." What does that mean? "Take your shoes off your feet." And he did so, going naked and barefoot. The Lord said, "Even as my servant Isaiah has gone naked and barefoot 3 years as a sign and token against Cush, Egypt and Cush, so the king of Assyria will lead away the captives of Egypt and exiles of Cush, young and old, naked and barefoot, with buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt." So beware what you wish for. Being a prophet was not, you did not sit on a throne. Chances were even, Stephen, that this was your lot. And then
Whatever you say, you're gonna be uncomfortable.
yeah, speaking of that, there's this one. This is Ezekiel. Get yourself a brick. Ezekiel's already going, "Oh no, what's he gonna have me do? Place it before you and inscribe a city on it, Jerusalem." I wonder how long that took. "Lay siege against it," a brick. "Build a siege wall." Look how specific he is. "Raise a ramp, pitch camps, and place battering rams against it all around on a brick. Then get yourself an iron plate and set it up as an iron wall between you and the city on a brick, and set your face toward it so that it is under siege, and besiege it." What is that? I don't know how you besiege a brick. But anyway, you think, so now Ezekiel's thinking, "Oh, good, that's over with. That wasn't too bad. Uh-oh. As for you, lie down on your left side and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel on it. You shall bear their iniquity for the number of days that you lie on it, for I have assigned you a number of days." Now Ezekiel's going, "Oh boy, how many days?" "Days corresponding to the years of their iniquity, 390 days. And then that's over. I'm glad that's
I
over.
wonder if he had a Walkman. You know?
So then he thinks like, it's over finally. 390. When you've completed these, You shall lie down a second time, but on the other side and bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. So that's what it meant to be a prophet. And of course, the long list is long. Elijah and his misery.
What was the last scripture of the Jews?
Ezekiel 4. Isaiah 20. Yeah. So I decided, so here comes Agabus, who gets off the hook, who gets off scot-free, who God goes easy on, and he just binds himself. But anyway, nobody around would be at a loss to understand what it is that Agabus is doing here. He's like a prophet, like John the Baptist, who was also demonstrative, wearing a coat, wearing whatever he was wearing, eating locusts and wild honey, living in the wilderness. That was all demonstrative as well. And so then here comes Agabus. So, in the best tradition of the Old Testament prophets, we get this, which is a statement about the certainty with which the events will happen. So that's why they tone it up a notch and try to urge Paul not to go. Because this has been hanging around out there, right? We found out earlier that Paul, in chapter 20, that Paul was bound by the Spirit to go to Jerusalem. Earlier on in this, or then later, just before this, they were urging, I think in Tyre, they were urging Paul not to go to, in the Spirit, not to go to Jerusalem. And now you have this, as he gets closer, it just becomes more heightened, and you have this demonstrative prophecy by Agabus.
Didn't we talk about this once before?
Probably. I talk about everything. I tend to
In King James, all with Thomas. And then like persuaded, we cease saying, will the Lord be done? Does that mean that they didn't believe it was the will of the Lord? That's what we were talking about last time.
All right. So what are we to make of that statement? Talk about more interesting stuff.
What statement is
The
that?
will of the Lord be done. Is Luke just recording, because that's what they said, so he's recording this for
Well,
posterity?
all of the Christians' life. If you're study the Word of God, if you are a true follower of God, that is the conclusion that you come to, is that God is in charge of everything, doing what he wants, when he wants, with whom he wants. And our job is to be okay with that,
No matter what.
no matter what.
And in fact, we do not flinch.
That's right. So the will of the Lord be done is just a statement from a strong Christian saying, this is what Christian life, activity and life is about.
So if you're these people and you know the traditions about Jesus, because they're not written down yet, but you know his life because they've been the events of his life have been passed down orally in your gatherings. Is this beginning to sound eerily familiar with Paul? Now you have these disciples saying something after watching Paul's determination to go to Jerusalem, where they all now know, really, when you say he's going to be bound and delivered over, when he's going to go to Jerusalem and he's going to be bound and delivered to the Gentiles, does that sound like anybody else in the New Testament?
Jesus.
So Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem, Luke 9:51. Paul was determined to go to Jerusalem. I forget where now at this point, 20 verse something. Off we go, bound by the Spirit to go to Jerusalem. Now he gets this prophecy. The Son of Man will be delivered to the Gentiles, and they will kill him, and on 3 days later he'll be risen he will raise from the dead. That's what Jesus said. Now this prophet shows up, says to Paul, you will be bound just like this happened now. You will be bound by the Gentiles when you get to Jerusalem. The parallels keep stacking up. Now you have this last statement, the will of the Lord be done. Think of the garden. Proceeded as custom to the Mount of Olives, the disciple followed him. When he arrived at the place, he said, pray that you may not enter into temptation, and withdrew. They do their praying. If you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. But I can't help but think that if they had to have known these traditions, and if they did, the events before them are echoing Jesus' life before their eyes. And I think they understand Paul's destiny now. That he is going to walk in the footsteps of Jesus in some way. And so they echo, I'm just assuming that they knew what happened here because of these traditions that were being passed around. And so they echo, or Luke, or they don't know it, but Luke does. And when he records it, because of all the parallels with Jesus' life and Stephen's, which we'll get to in a minute, he wants you to understand that these two, Jesus and Paul, were marching in parallel to Jerusalem to be delivered over to the Gentiles, but 24 years apart or something like that. And that Paul was perfectly aware of it. Certainly Paul understood what was going on.
So
So
they understood, they just stopped sinning. Kind of.
They
That's
accepted
the way
it.
Paul, yeah. That was what it was.
yes, and I think also because maybe because we understand now he's going to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. And that's what he's telling us. Why are you trying to sway me like the disciples did Jesus? Why are you trying to sway me from my path? I'm just as willing to go to Jerusalem and not only suffer but die as he was.
You would think that would be the point where they would want to keep saying the will of the Lord.
Yeah, maybe they did. I mean, this is all you got written down, but always in every case, more is actually said than is recorded. Conversations don't, these are summaries, some kind of summaries of the conversations that these people were having. And yes. And they probably bore it proudly at this point. Now, if you're these other people, like Luke, who was with him at this time, well, the disciples didn't really know that when they went to Jerusalem, Jesus was going to be arrested and turned over to the Roman procurator and crucified. They went in eyes wide closed, right? And so they were floored and they scattered. These guys don't know that if when they get there, they will be arrested along with Paul. So when they say the will of the Lord be done, they're not just talking about Paul. They're talking about themselves too. So one step ahead of where the disciples were in Jesus' life. Partly because they had Jesus, they had that they could reflect on that. I just ad-libbed all that. So based on the things that you asked and what some people said. So I reserve the right to recant next week. Although right now it sounds pretty
So far,
good.
you only have
One recant,
one thing that,
one recantifying.
don't you think that the history of Paul and that journey where he got kicked out of the city so many times, he was left for dead, I mean, they've known that too. And so this is just like the ultimate one, right?
Oh, I'm in the wrong chapter or the wrong book.
Hard to comprehend, but even though Jesus was suffering, suffering was not the most important thing, but what he was going to give grace and glorify God.
Yeah, that statement by Paul, by Jesus, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air, foxes have dens, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, was a much more all-encompassing statement about his life and its orientation than, he doesn't mean he's homeless. He doesn't simply mean he's homeless. He means he's destined in his life and death to suffer. So if you want to join me, you're going to get the same thing. And Paul's jumping on board. Yeah, he is bearing the cross of Christ. I fill up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Do I have that somewhere? And he does so proudly. I gotta look it up. The Colossians, I think. Yeah, now I rejoice in my sufferings. So this would have been written just before this at some point. I think, I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake, a church he never went to up to this point. He never went to the church in Colossae, but he's filling up the sufferings on their behalf. And in my flesh, I do my share on behalf of his body, the church, and filling up what is lacking in Christ's afflictions. That's how he understood. So is he going to not go to Jerusalem because of suffering? How long have you people been with me? You don't understand. What are you guys talking about? You don't understand. Me, after all this time, you don't understand me. How I conceive of my ministry, how I understand my ministry, my calling.
Do you think he had more of a desire to suffer because he persecuted the church?
Yeah, he's going to talk about that when he gets before the people, when he gets arrested here shortly. And he's going to ask, while he's being taken up into the Antonia fortress, he's going to ask the tribune if he can stop and talk to the people who want to kill him. And when he does that, he talks about how he persecuted this way to the death. And then it's either in that one or the next one with in front of Agrippa II, he's going to start talking about Stephen. It's my own view. It's my own view that Stephen was ever present in his mind in ministry. Stephen's ministry is so much like Paul's. Remember, Jesus is going to suffer and die in Jerusalem at the hands of the council, even though it's the Romans. Stephen is going to be stoned in Jerusalem. Paul is going to be arrested in Jerusalem and then taken to Rome. And there's this common theme between those three. So I think the idea that Paul was picking up the baton that was dropped when Stephen was executed he was self-conscious of that. His ministry is so much an extension. Stephen could have been Paul. The nature of the way that he conducted his ministry, he's kind of like Apollos too. He powerfully refuted the Jews in the Hellenistic synagogue. You know, his knowledge of the tradition of the Old Testament. He's very much like Apollos and Paul. So there's a connection between these people. There's a bond, not just on the ground in terms of their fellowship, but there's a similarity of characteristics and the way that they conducted their ministry that could not have been coincidental. I got to listen to the Zoom feed to hear what it is that I just said, because I don't remember any of it. I do that too. I'll listen to the Zoom feed and go, did I really say that? Sounds pretty good. Did I read that somewhere? Did I say that? I lose track of that a lot too. I try to give credit where credit is due. But. Okay, let's talk about this statement right here in blue. The Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles. That is the divinely inspired way of thinking. That is God's way of thinking about it. On the ground, it's about right around the corner. On the ground, the Jews are going to start beating Paul to death. The Romans are going to rescue him from the Jews. They're going to bind him, and then they're going to take him basically to house arrest so that he won't be killed. That's the way the situation on the ground looks. That's the way it unfolded. This is the prophecy. From the divine vantage point, it's the Jews. Once again, just like with Jesus' ministry, the Jews are held responsible. In the actual story, the Jews are held responsible here, and in the actual story, the Gentiles will save Paul from the Jews. Just like Jesus, the Romans tried to save Jesus from the Jews. So there's another one of those eerie parallels. We'll get to that in a little bit. Blue stuff. Let's see. Okay, that's good enough for that. I can just fill it. All right. Now, as for why Paul was so determined to go to Jerusalem, it's never stated in Acts. He's just determined to go to Jerusalem. He's not a masochist. He's not looking for persecution. He'd rather be out there. He wants to go to Rome and then to Spain. We'll find that out in a minute. That's his plan. So he's got a resolve. He's got a resolve to go to Jerusalem, and it has to be explained in such a way that you go, oh, that makes sense why he would do that. And we have an answer to that question. Book of Romans was probably written just before this on his third missionary journey. He's in Macedonia or Achaia, I think, or something. He might be in Corinth because he ended up back in Achaia after he left Ephesus. Before he started back on this trip. For this reason, I have often been prevented from coming to you, the Romans. This is the end of the book. But now, with no further place for me in these regions, since I have for many years a longing to come see you, be careful what you wish for. Paul wants to go to Rome, and to Rome he will go. Whenever I go to Spain, so we get a little hint there of his intent. He's fully preached the gospel. He doesn't like to build on another man's foundation, so he wants to go where there's fresh frontiers, which he can do in the Roman Empire again because of this marvelous situation here, right? All the way there. So he gets help in Rome, proceeds on his way to Spain, and he has a whole new ministry to begin. Pretty cool. For I hope to see you in passing, be helped on my way there by you when I have first enjoyed your company for a while. So all this stuff in Romans, this magnificent treatise on about 4 different things, this masterpiece, was written as an introduction to a people that he had never seen before, that he was not planning on spending very long with, but was just going to go and then get help to Spain, which he never did. We'll get back to that. For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. So this is just a little while ago on his trip to Macedonia and Achaia. Yes, they were pleased to do so, and they are indebted to them. The Gentile converts on the other side of the Aegean Sea are indebted to them, the Jews in Jerusalem. For if the Gentiles have shared in their spiritual things, so he sees the Gentile growth as an outgrowth, as a benefit done by the Palestinian Jews in the first place. But they are indebted to minister to them also in material things. So he feels like the Hellenistic Christians, Gentile Christians, owe something back to the mother church. Which makes what's about to happen so remarkably strange. Therefore, when I have finished this and have put my seal on this fruit of theirs, meaning I deliver it to Jerusalem, I will go on my way by way of you to Spain, and so on and so forth. So that's his plan. But he also planned on a big ministry in Asia, none of which happened. How long did Paul take preparing this stuff? I don't know. But he's thought about this Spain thing, and it's going to have turned out to be all for naught. But anyway, I think that's what's driving him to Jerusalem. He has to fulfill his responsibility of debt that these Gentile converts here in Achaia and Macedonia feel towards the church in Jerusalem. He wants them to know this common bond that's represented by this gift, because these guys are having a tough go of it. So you can understand then that if they're having such a tough go of it, which they were, we'll talk about James later. James only has a few more years of life left. He probably died before Jesus did. They're having a tough go of it in Jerusalem. If Paul was having a tough go of it with Hellenistic Jews out in the world, how much tougher for Palestinian Christians among Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem? So James will be a victim of that. We'll get to that later. But yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. James probably died before Paul did. But there's a certain amount of, there's certain things we can say for sure, but in this stuff, there's always guesswork. So that would explain his determination to go to Jerusalem. Okay, on we go. done with that, done with that. Huh? You'll sit there and like it,
Can you blame the guy?
or not. It's not like I have a lot of leverage in the matter. Let's see. Okay. After these days, we got ready. How far was I supposed to read? I lost track. 17. After these days, we got ready and started on our way up to Jerusalem, because anywhere to Jerusalem is up to Jerusalem, and anywhere from Jerusalem is down to wherever. Because Jerusalem was on the mount. Some of the disciples from Caesarea also came with us. So what's important about Caesarea? Remember, Caesarea, we know some stuff about Caesarea. Caesarea, there we go. Caesarea was the administrative headquarters of the Romans in Palestine. And so built by Herod the Great. So it had a lot of Romans in it. So for a guy like Paul, it's very safe. In fact, when he gets in trouble in Jerusalem, Claudius Lysias, the Roman tribune, is going to send him to Caesarea, where he will spend 2 years under guard. But anyway, why was I saying all this? So he's going to come down from Caesarea, and he is going to bring with him people, fellow Jews, plus his own entourage of converts from Achaia and Macedonia and Ephesus, only one of which do we hear about, and that's going to be Trophimus. But he's got more than that. If they're bringing a contribution to the saints in Jerusalem, there's undoubtedly representatives from all those places, from those churches with him, because they want to see the benefit. They want to see the consequence of the extension of their own church out into these areas, and to bring these disciples back so they can see them. Speaks almost as much as the gift itself. It's really an extraordinary picture. But anyway, so here they go to Caesarea on the coast here, administrative headquarters. Let's see. Some of the disciples from Caesarea also came with us, taking us to Nason of Cyprus. So we have another Hellenistic Jew, Hellenistic Jewish Christian. So probably Hellenists in Caesarea. Now a Hellenist, he's going to stay with a Hellenist in Jerusalem. Probably because he's not exactly sure he's going to get a very good welcome among the Palestinian Jews in Jerusalem. So he stays among people like himself, because he's a Hellenistic Jew as well. Disciple of longstanding, with whom we were to lodge. Longstanding, replace that word with early. Beginning disciple, early disciple, something like that. So maybe a founding right there from the very beginning. That's who Paul's going to stay with. And then we'll go ahead and stop before we get to the statement from James and the others. After we arrived in Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. So, it's all peaches and cream, right? Great and tear, the heartwarming send off, great with Philip, except for the binding and being told that he's going to suffer. He's going to be arrested. It's just, they get to Jerusalem. The brethren received us gladly. What could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong for a man? It's not like Paul asked for trouble, right? He's so easy to get along with. He goes into these synagogues and he just is so conciliatory and accommodating. Who could he possibly have annoyed in all of his travels across Asia, right?
The Jews in Jerusalem.
Yeah, remember he's coming back to. Remember that the last time we recorded in Acts that he's been to Jerusalem, remember what happened? He had to leave Jerusalem because of a plot by the Jews. That's how he ended up in Tarsus. And then Barnabas went to Antioch and then went to Tarsus and brought him back to Antioch. But that's why he left. So as far as we know, you don't want any part of Jerusalem. So he already knows they don't hate me there. So yeah. One big happy Hellenistic family, Greek-speaking family. All right. We'll go ahead and stop there, 10:15, and then we'll
I can't wait.
we'll let the chaos ensue. 18, and the chaos will, like so much else in this narrative, the chaos of 17 of what's coming in Jerusalem will eerily reflect a chaos that happened earlier in Ephesus. So if you want homework, go do that. Go reread the story of the total chaos in the theater. I almost had the riot in Ephesus, and then read what's coming here, and you'll see what Luke is doing with the story. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the feed. Thanks for joining. And we'll see you later.
You say, see you later. Like, later.